So Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote an article in The Atlantic going after Bernie Sanders for not supporting reparations. So his argument goes something like this. He says that Bernie is the candidate of radicalism, and then on this one issue, somehow he abandons his radicalism and becomes a pragmatist. And he says stuff like this, quote, "First of all, its likelihood, meaning a reparations bill, of getting through Congress is nil. Second of all, I think it would be very divisive." So Coates' argument is like, look, man, that makes no sense. Are you the candidate of bold radicalism or not? Are you the candidate who's going to stand up for these things that, you know, you're pushing hard for in every other arena or not? So he views it as effectively a betrayal of Bernie's own moral code. And he says, you know, you're failing on this one issue, and that issue happens to be very important to many people, and it's the issue of pushing back in the strongest way against white supremacy. Now, you know, I think I'm giving a fair analysis here and a fair summation of it. You can go read his article if you want, and you'll get the idea of his full argument. But in my view, the flaw in that argument is, if you actually go by the poll numbers, virtually everything that Bernie is pushing for is overwhelmingly popular. So in reality, he's not the candidate of radicalism. He's really the candidate of democracy, the democratic will of the American people. So, and I can give you specifics on that too. You tell me the issue, I'll give you the number. If you talk about something like the minimum wage, 80% of the American people want to raise the minimum wage. You talk about our involvement in Syria and all these wars overseas, only 17% of the American people wanted to get involved in Syria in the first place. This is the one candidate who's like, yeah, we should probably stay out of there. And you go down the list. I mean, the war in Afghanistan is less popular than the war in Vietnam. When Vietnam was at its most unpopular point, there's another area where Bernie's leagues ahead of everybody else. Money in politics. He's the only one talking about it, and the American people overwhelmingly agree with him. Even over 80% of Republicans agree with him on that. So, as I've argued before in other contexts, he's more the candidate of what I call international centrism. So, he's the only real moderate, middle ground political voice in an international context in the U.S. because our spectrum is so far to the right overall. Now, on the issue of reparations specifically, only 15% of Americans are for it. So, whether we like it or not, and whether we agree with it or not, Bernie's actually echoing the democratic will of the people on this. Now, again, it's fine to disagree with that, and it's fine to call him out and try to push him on that to see if perhaps you can convince him in the other direction. But the bottom line is, if 15% of the American people are for reparations, and Bernie is also not for reparations, I mean, he is representing the overwhelming majority of the people. But let me go ahead and go further here, because I want to give you Coates' argument, and then you make up your own mind. He says, quote, "From 1619 until at least the late 1960s, American institutions, businesses, associations, and governments, federal, state, and local, repeatedly plundered black communities. Their methods included everything from land theft to redlining to disenfranchisement to convict lease labor to lynching to enslavement to the vending of children. So large was this plunder that America, as we know it today, is simply unimaginable without it. Its great universities were founded on it. Its early economy was built by it. Its suburbs were financed by it. Its deadliest wars was the result of it. One can't evade these facts by changing the subject. Sanders should be directly confronted and asked why his political imagination is so active against plutocracy, but so limited against white supremacy. Jim Crow and its legacy were not merely problems of disproportionate poverty. Why should black voters support a candidate who does not recognize this?" Okay, now, I have an answer for that. because by a mile and a half, he's the best candidate. He's the best candidate for the black community, for the poor, for the middle class, and for the American people overall. Again, don't get me wrong. Are you allowed to be tough on him and try to drag him to the left and try to push him to an area where you think he should agree with you, but he doesn't agree with you? Yes, I support that 100%. But does that mean that it then makes sense to not vote for him in the election or to vote for a worse candidate? No. No, that makes no sense. So you're going to say, well, this guy overall, of all of his policies, taking everything into account, he gets let's for argument's sake say a 91%. Hillary Clinton gets a 72% because she, of course, voted for the Iraq War. She voted for the Patriot Act. She was in favor of intervention in Libya. You go down the list. She wasn't for gay marriage until just a few years ago, and before then she was adamant against it. So she gets a 70-something, right, a worse grade. And then you're going to come around and write an article and say, well, this guy's not for reparations. Newsflash, neither is Hillary. So where's your article going after Hillary for the same topic? Look, I got no problem with you writing the article, and you're making your overall argument for reparations is a strong argument. But are you going to apply this standard objectively or not? Are you only going to try to kneecap the most progressive candidate with this argument, or are you going to apply it objectively and also say, look, this applies to Hillary too? And I don't know who he supports overall, but let's say he's somebody who agrees, well, yeah, Hillary is too far right-wing. At least say that in your article. At least say, hey, by the way, even though I'm going hard after Bernie here, let's keep everything in perspective. These arguments apply to Hillary as well, and Hillary's actually worse on all the other issues. And that's the main problem with the article. I want to legalize gambling, for example, and prostitution, and all drugs. I want to legalize, tax, and regulate these things. Bernie, as far as I know, only wants to legalize marijuana. I haven't heard him say anything about all the other drugs. I know he wants to end the drug war, but legalize the other drugs? I haven't heard him say anything about that. Obviously, I haven't heard him say anything about legalizing prostitution or gambling. When it comes to the minimum wage, I'm in favor of a slightly different proposal where he's in favor of $15 an hour minimum wage across the board. I'm in favor of making it a living wage in each state. So in Wyoming, that might be $10.57 an hour, but in New York, that might be $21 an hour. So I'm in favor of making it a living wage in every state and then chaining it to inflation, and then we never have to address the issue again because the minimum wage is a living wage. So the point is, my ideal policy solutions for different issues are not 100% in alignment with Bernie Sanders. They're just not. But does that mean that I'm going to say, throw my hands up and say, that's it? No, I mean, come on. You're so off on this that I'm going to write an article about how bad you are on this issue and then use it to heavily imply that, you're not as good a candidate as people think you are, and perhaps I'm not going to vote or I'll vote for the worst candidate. No, that last part makes no sense. It just doesn't make sense. At the very least, if you're going to make this argument against Bernie Sanders, throw in a couple lines about how not only does this apply to Hillary as well, Hillary's actually worse because she's much less progressive on all the other issues too. You didn't do that, so overall, I gotta say, job not very well done.